waste is the enemy and what's making you hustle right now. Waste is also what's making you reach into that machine more times per shift than you should. And when you reach in is where you get hurt.
Hello and welcome back to the Manufacturing Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Mayer, and I am just really excited that you're here with us today. Today's episode is going to be really fun, really exciting. Our guest today is George Pesansky. He's been on the Work But Make It Human show. Well, we've recorded it. We haven't released it. Stars might actually align, and George, your 2 episodes may come out at once. But today, George is going to be with us talking about his story, his experience as a leader in operational excellence. But before we dive into George, real quick, just want to ask you, dear audience, if you like this show, please, wherever you're listening to us right now, like the show. Give it a heart, give it a star, whatever platform you're on, give it one of those. Type George Pesansky as a rock star into the comments. I don't care what you put in there. It's not for me. It's not for George. It's so more people can find the show. And really, that's what's important here. So without further ado, George Pesansky is a global authority on operational excellence. He's spent more than 30 years inside organizations figuring out how to work or how work actually gets done and how to make it better. He's trained and coached over 10,000 professionals across 6 continents, helping Fortune 500 companies, nonprofits, and other organizations turn good intentions into measurable performance. George Pesansky, welcome to the Manufacturing Culture Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jim. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited too, man. This is the highlight of my week when I get to record these episodes. So I'm glad you're here with me today. George, I have a couple of standard icebreakers on this show. The first one gives us a lot of insight into who you are as a person, me and the audience. So the first icebreaker, George, is if your life were a movie, what genre would it be? Who plays you? And what's the opening scene?
Yeah, I'm going to say it's going to be an action movie, and I am going to play it as the Matrix and Neo.
Okay.
And I think, it's, and I referenced this actually in Super Performance, but I think it's the opening scene for me is learning from the child, not to bend the spoon, but to bend the world around the spoon. I really like to think that movie, and really, kind of my way of thinking is really about how to, kind of control the environment around us. And I try to do that with creating great systems.
Awesome. I love that. And so would Keanu Reeves play George Pesansky in the movie about George Pesansky?
I don't know that in his contract if he would gain that much weight, but maybe.
I like that. That's a good answer, man. I like that. And so just so you know, George, my audience has heard me say this a couple of times or numerous times at this point. I asked that question because, like I said before the question, it gives us an insight into who you are, right? We're all in media res, and that opening scene gives us the idea of where your origin story begins, right? The genre tells us who you are, and the actor tells us how you see yourself, right? So all of those fun things combined into one little question.
Yeah.
And it could be one of my favorite questions I ask. George, the next icebreaker is a little bit more in depth. You're on the Manufacturing Culture Podcast, so we like to talk about culture here, but a lot of people know the definition of culture. And what I've found over the course of a decade of cultural work is culture is very individualistic. It means different things to different people. And so this question is to you, to George Pesansky, what does culture mean?
Yeah, those are 2 really great questions. I believe culture represents the norms. And when I say the norms, I think, probably many, if not all of your listeners can appreciate that when you go to work, there are certain norms in how we kind of interact with each other, how we treat each other. And those same norms don't exist necessarily at the grocery store when you're shopping and somebody cuts you off. or
Absolutely.
when you're driving home. And, the culture of how we interact with each other inside of work, outside of work, kind of within the communities we live in really represents the norms. Are we kind to each other? Are we helping each other? Are there practices in terms of the way we relate to each other? What's the acceptable standard of performance? So for me, it really is about what is typical, what is, kind of that norm that we can kind of fall into and be comfortable with.
Yeah, I like that. And you're right when you bring up the supermarket, when you bring up those other areas, right? There are norms to that. It's a social contract that we have. And how does it apply to work? I love that answer. Great answer. So let's talk about George. Like dive into George and who you are. You've had a 30-year career or over 30-year career. And in that career, what was the first moment that you realized that performance problems were typically system problems, not people problems?
Yeah, it's going to go way back for me. Really, one of the first real jobs I had after I graduated from college, aside from kind of the part-time summer kind of gigs, was in the military. I went on active duty as an officer coming out of my college education, and through a series of very weird circumstances, I was trained as a chemical officer, but I ended up becoming a tank platoon leader.
Oh, cool.
And really, I never actually saw a tank up close until I I was now responsible for 4 of them. Literally, it's gonna be kind of embarrassing, but the gun tubes are typically, kind of, stored over the back deck of the tank. And, when I walked up to the tank, I thought that was the front because that was the direction the gun was pointing. Not a great start, getting going. But the reason I'm gonna cite this example and kind of where did I learn it's about a system, the military is really good at this, and I had a wonderful group of soldiers who were less than happy, I think, than, that they now had this lieutenant who wasn't sure what end of the tank literally went forward, right? The systems that help you train, the systems around how you operate and interact, there are so many opportunities to train, so many opportunities to learn. And if you're open minded and willing to listen and really start to grow in your knowledge and experience, that same tank and that same platoon, we ended up, winning as the very best tank in our annual gunnery contest. And my platoon won as the very best platoon in that gunnery contest. And it was, to me, the example that it's not whether I had a particular background from West Point or went to a school or, had some lifelong desire to be a tank platoon leader. It was really that system and my ability to try to help those people fulfill their full potential. And in doing that, it helped me realize that my potential is much greater than what I thought it could be. So it was a wonderful sort of formative experience for me.
I love that. And so let me ask you a question a little bit deeper into that. If you look at the world of manufacturing, right? We have a lot of we have a leadership gap, not just like shop floor gap, right? We have historically promoted the best machinist or the best welder into positions of leadership that maybe wasn't the best person for that leadership role. On the flip side, you go on Reddit and you see a lot of people complaining about shops, organizations, manufacturers, factories hiring somebody with an MBA to come in and lead the organization because they've never been a machinist. They've never been on a shop floor. Talk us through that dichotomy of that leadership gap and the MBAs and how using your example of not knowing what the front of the tank was, right? That's to me, that's the equivalent of walking into a shop and not knowing what a CNC machine does. And the
Yes.
people saying, well, how can those leaders, those MBA leaders walk in and because they've got the skill set, they've got the ability to come in and lead, but they don't know. Is there a way that this can all work?
I really believe there is, and it really is kind of the heart of the book I wrote, Super Performance, because the trick here is to recognize that you don't have the answer. So I think that is the mistake, or that is kind of the thing that MBA or even, that recent engineering college grad, the ones that recognize that what they've learned in school is only going to be a greens fee. It's only going to get them the job. It's only going to give them the opportunity. And the gift that was given to me is because I didn't know what end of the tank went forward. I had no choice. I came in with, no ego, no attitude. Like, okay, I'm completely a sponge. You guys help me. And in the military, it's the non-commissioned officer, it's the NCOs, it's the sergeants. I think you can take that to manufacturing as those are your leads. Those are your frontline supervisors. They're the ones that are going to maintain the standards. They're the ones who are going to do the most training. They're going to do the most mentoring. They're going to help people be successful. And I don't think there would ever be somebody who served in the military who wouldn't clearly describe how incredibly important NCOs are, that without them, it just doesn't work, And I see the same exact thing in manufacturing, that frontline leadership, that frontline supervisor is, in my opinion, the NCO of manufacturing. And when organizations are really suffering with poor quality because they haven't maybe hired the right people, they haven't mentored them, they haven't given them the right direction, or the more senior leaders, the plant management or, kind of C-suite type folks don't understand how important that frontline leadership is, that's when things go really sideways. So yeah, you could be an MBA if you come in and you're humble and say, okay, now it's actually time to learn the way things work and let me learn from the people who do this work. Let me learn from these frontline supervisors what it takes to, have a perfect shift. You have a wonderful career ahead of you. But if you come in and say, let me show you what you don't know, they certainly would have pointed me to the back of the tank and taken lots of pictures of me and, it not helped me at all, right? If I would have
I love that.
demanded that is now the front of the tank.
Right.
Right.
Right. Just lucky that cell phones weren't a thing when we were younger, George.
Oh my goodness. I would never be able to show my face in public, I'm sure.
Awesome. Thanks for answering that. And you've worked across 6 continents, as I alluded to, which means you've seen a ton of different work cultures, right? And
Yes.
we talk about culture as it comes to organizational culture, but you also have that regional or geographic specific culture issue. So what did seeing those different work cultures teach you about humans and what humans need to perform at their best level?
It comes back to, really our opening conversation about culture and norms. And it doesn't, make it right or wrong, but the cultures are different. And, the people who live within those cultures are comfortable with the way those cultures work. One, I think great example is I was working with a company that had a lot of operations in Eastern Europe. And I have a very participative management style. I really want to listen. I want to do that Gemba. I want to hear from, what people are thinking and seeing. And I want them to own where we go and what we do. A very good friend of mine who was kind of helping and supporting with these efforts, he pulled me aside on the manufacturing floor and said, "You got to stop asking people to do things." And I thought, well, why else am I here? Like, he said, they're not thinking that any of the things you're doing, any of the things you're asking are at all necessary. That they're ignoring you completely because if you don't tell them this needs to be done, there is no choice. And now you can kind of come up with your idea on how you're going to do it. But if you don't, become much more explicit in the direction you're giving, you can't be passive about, just sort of throwing ideas out there and seeing what happens with them. And that made a huge change, and we still had a participative discussion, but it was more about what must happen versus what do you guys think? And it's just culture. It's just different in different regions, different areas, and adopting and learning how to work within those norms, I think, is what helps people obviously translate their experiences and their knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. You've built Capacity to Care. You founded a nonprofit, challenges high performers to donate their talent, not just their time, in order to strengthen their communities, right? And the people around them. Uh, what experience led you to I don't want to say transition away from consulting to capacity to care, but what prompted that transition for you? Because I don't think you truly have left consulting. It just looks different for you. So what was the impetus for that transition?
Yeah, I think like anyone, if you're a musician, when you play a piece of music that is extraordinarily satisfying, you kind of have that in, kind of that dopamine, that endorphin rush of that, that was great. I really, I really feel good about it. Now, whether anybody heard it or not actually doesn't matter because I'm just super happy with what that was. You wax and clean your sports car and say, well, I'm really just happy with how this looks. And nobody can see it because it's in my garage, but I'm just really happy with that. Kind of weird, but I don't have a sports car. I can't play the guitar, but I can really help processes. I can really help systems. So I get my dopamine rush out of doing that. And what I found is it's good when I'm helping a for-profit company because it helps people retain their jobs and it creates value. But it is a total drug when you're doing it, when it's going to help a community, when it's going to help somebody that has a mission that really is about transforming people's lives. And those organizations, they typically just don't have the resources to hire talent or to have full-time resources that are professional process improvement, professional continuous improvement folks. They may be lucky to have, some volunteer or something, but for the most part, that just doesn't exist. So it is, lots of that low hanging fruit, lots of really great opportunities for somebody to say, hey, let's really think about flow. Let's think about value. Let's think about waste. And before you know it, hey, we don't need 9 volunteers. We only need 4 if we think about this as work cells, and have some efficiency with how we're packing the Thanksgiving meals.
Yep. I love it. So when you walk into an organization for the first time, George, what are some of the things you look for, the first signs that tell you that performance is being strangled by the system that exists within that organization?
Engagement is something that you can almost feel in the air. And it's, we talked about culture earlier and these norms because, engagement is part of that culture.
Yes.
Um, having lived in a lot of different places around the country, I'll use the grocery store as an example, that if I walk into the grocery store in Alabama, the likelihood of somebody asking me, who I don't even know, how I'm doing, what's going on, like just the friendliness that you may find is very different than where I grew up in New York. you know, it's a
Absolutely. Yes.
night and day. Just the cultural norm of somebody stealing the cart from me as I'm trying to grab it. Like just that's mine. And again, not wrong. It's just different. You can feel it in that sense. You can feel it when you've walked into enough manufacturing sites as well. The willingness for people to make eye contact, the willingness for them to engage in a conversation, to answer questions beyond one word answers. These are indicators that people's head is in the game. They're proud of what it is they're doing and how they're doing it, where you don't necessarily get the eye contact. You don't get, beyond the one word answers or conversations. And there's lots of little signs, the trash in the parking lot, the cleanliness of the break rooms. These are all just indicators that, something good is happening here or something very bad may be happening.
100% agree, man. I tell people all the time because I'm asked that question a lot. I go into hundreds of shops every year. And I can tell the culture of an organization the minute I walk onto the floor. If the machinists, if the skilled tradespeople are looking at their shoes, then it's not a great culture or it doesn't align with who they are, right? And that's one of those things that I've learned over the course of time is there's no truly bad culture. It's the alignment of values between the people on the floor and the organization itself. If you have that alignment, it's healthy, whether it's toxic for me and healthy for you or vice versa. But if you walk into a shop and everybody's looking at their shoes, they don't want to talk, they're doing that for a reason. And it's typically that they're going to get in trouble or reprimanded for engaging with people who walk onto the shop floor. Conversely, If you've got a lively shop that people are into their work, but they'll wave even to strangers, that's a sign that there's a good cultural alignment there, right? And you brought up the break room. The other place I look is the bathroom. Is
Yeah.
there I walk into the stalls on purpose in every shop that I go into just to see if there's graffiti, because you typically don't carve something into the stall wall in a place you care about, right? You do that into a place that you could leave tomorrow and never come back and it'd be okay.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, you could definitely feel it in the air.
Yeah, it's tangible. It really is. So you have very literally written the book on super performance. And I got that right. That is the title of your
It is,
book,
yeah,
is
yeah.
Super
Yeah, yeah.
Performer, right?
It is. Super performance.
Yeah, super performance. So you've literally written the book on that. How does that differ from terms like hustle culture or the idea that we're just trying to squeeze more out of the people that we have and make them wear multiple hats and all the things that are driving people nuts on the floor?
Yeah. You know, that dichotomy that you're describing is what I've kind of faced my entire career, because if you're gonna be the process improvement person, if you're gonna say, "Hey, I'm gonna make you more efficient," immediately somebody who is clocking in for 12s or 16s thinks, "You're gonna take away my breaks. You're gonna make me run around. You're gonna make me, have to hustle, and do all these other things." And my credibility has always come from the deal that I make with them, that your job's going to get easier and it's going to get safer. And if it doesn't, I don't want you to do it.
I love that.
If you tell me this has gotten less safe and it's gotten harder, then I've failed. I shouldn't be doing this anymore, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to take waste out. Waste is the enemy, and waste is what's making you hustle right now. Waste is also what's making you reach into that machine more times per shift than you should. And when you reach in is where you get hurt. So if we have fewer reaches, then you got fewer chances. And, I would really like you to just be able to sit here, stand here, and not have to do a thing, because we've done better setups. We have better, standards. We've got better practices, and the machine is running well because we have better maintenance and better preventative care and all the things that are going to help it, exceed. So it's all about getting rid of that waste. I'm also a huge fan in not using metrics on the shop floor that are focused on what people have done wrong or where they're falling short. I think that also is a big buzzkill. It's a big culture killer.
Yeah.
It's how much downtime do you have? How much scrap have you generated? You'll see these metrics in all kinds of manufacturing operations everywhere. I always kind of think, that's kind of ridiculous in a way, right? It's measuring what people didn't do well, but also they tend not to be able to kind of control that in the moment either. It kind of is just additive, that this is the amount of scrap that generated over a 12-hour period. And it seemed fine in the first 4 hours. It got out of hand after that.
Yeah.
So I love this idea of what I call the golden hour of, trying to get people to get into that zone where we've been running for 90 minutes and there hasn't been any stops, any breaks, any problems, any issues. Okay, let's try to sort of think about what conditions helped us be able to do that. Like, did you do something different in the setup? Did you do something different in your checks? Are we using a different raw material? Like, what got us there? And now let's kind of set the goal for 2 hours if 90 minutes is what we've been able to do so far. And what I've always found is that any operator anywhere in the world, whether you're running the customer service desk or you're operating the CNC, can tell you when things have gone well and for how long,
Got it.
because that was the only time in the shift where I was kind of digging this. I
Yeah.
wasn't digging it when I was climbing underneath getting dripped on, with
Yeah.
all the oil and stuff, right? That was not the good moment. I remember the good moment was when I was, just able to kind of be here.
Yeah.
So giving them the chance to say, well, that's what I want to do. I want to stretch and extend these periods of Zen where everything is working. And let's understand the root causes that helped you get to those moments. Uh, People don't tend to argue with themselves. People don't tend to tell you that they're not good when you can point out when they are good. They see it as much more of a compliment. And I think, a lot of continuous improvement teams, a lot of, people who practice, this art, get a group of people in a room and say, let me tell you all the things you're doing wrong. Let me tell you all your defects, tell me all your failures, tell me all your mistakes. Now let's figure out how to fix you. And I don't know, I'm not super excited to go to that meeting.
Right. No, and that makes total sense. How do you structure performance reviews then around those kinds of things? Every machinist, every welder that I've ever met, and I haven't met every single one, but everyone that I've ever met typically seems to think they're the best machinist in the world. They're the best welder in the world, right? They're the best at their craft. Sometimes metrics say otherwise, whether that's scrap, whether that's on time to delivery, whether that's planned versus actual hours, whether that's whatever product yield, whatever metric that is. If we're saying let's focus on those positives, how do we do performance reviews better within that super performer framework?
Yeah. So a saying I like to use is that, perfection is not a unit of time.
Okay.
And
I like
I
that.
think, a lot of times we think about that high performance, or we think about that sort of perfect, game, if you will, like, doing a no hitter. And, that doesn't mean you don't ever give up a hit again for the rest of your career. It just means on a Friday afternoon, magic happened on the field, and it may only happen once in your career. But how do you get back to that moment? And that to me is so important in the performance review process, because if I say, well, the standard for you is no hitters. So, clearly, Jim, you've fallen short, right? Every game you pitched this year, you didn't have a no hitter. Does that mean now I'm just going to give up and not do that? Or if I happen to have one, now you're going to expect all of the ones I have are going to always be that good. So I think I'm going to let a couple runs go, just because I don't want you thinking that I'm always going to be perfect. I call that the prison of expectations, where you're now kind of lowering your performance because you don't want expectations to be too high. So the way to do this is to think about, when are we successful and how do we stretch and extend the periods of time we're successful? It's okay if we don't succeed, if we are not perfect. What's not okay is being able to not understand why. So it's the whole fail faster philosophy that you've, heard about in so many different books. Is I want you to leave it all on the field every day. If you're a machinist, I want you to come with the idea that we are going to produce perfect parts with no scrap, with no excessive downtime, no equipment damage, no tooling damage. It's going to be the perfect shift. It's going to be the perfect game, just like that baseball game. And if you hit it, we're going to celebrate it. If you don't, what we want to understand is, well, what worked, but also what didn't work. So when you come to play tomorrow, we try to have that perfect game again. That to me is a sustainable coaching model, where I'm always trying to get my players to play at their maximum potential. Yelling at the kids and saying, look, you guys are not scoring enough runs, and that's why this team keeps losing. That's not the coach I want to play for.
Yeah. No, I love it. And George, you've had some good moments so far. That is your moment. We could wrap this interview right now, and I would be very happy with how this has gone. But I have more questions for you. But so far, I have chills. That was just so well put, man, because you walk into these shops, I walk into these shops, and the no hitter is the expectation. When I talk about allowing failure, and the GM or the shift supervisor says, well, I can't allow failure because that leads to scrap, and scrap can be tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's the wrong mindset. That's setting people up to walk in the door and say, man, I've got to dial it back because I know I can't go far enough to get to that point where I'm going to fail. Is that
Yes.
a valid statement?
Oh, 100%. One of my favorite things to do to help really understand a process and to also build credibility is I love working nights. I love kind of coming in and working with those crews, because they're always the ones that are going to talk the most. They're usually working nights, not because they don't have tenure. Some of them are, they haven't gotten, the time to get on days, but a lot of folks working nights are doing it because they don't get hassled. They get to kind of do their thing, and they don't have a lot of trouble with, a lot of people getting in their business. So they'll tell you the whole story. And I don't think there's a situation ever where, for example, somebody experiences a bunch of downtime on the equipment. So they got a CNC machine, some tooling broke. They lost 40 minutes having to replace it and fix it and correct it. And they have, a number of units that have to get produced by the end of the shift. And magically, they all get done in a record amount of time. Like, how did that happen? Well, it happens all the time. And it's that prison of expectations of when they sit down and do the math of how much time it took me to make those parts. That's kind of what they expected. What they didn't know is I accidentally broke this tooling and it lost 45 minutes, but then I made it all up on the speed.
Yes.
But by no means am I ever going to run that fast all the time, because then they're going to want me to run that fast all the time. That is what those leaders don't understand. That by, in the words of my favorite poets, 38 Special, you got to hang on loosely, right? You, you got to back up a little bit, because you're kind of holding too tight, and you're kind of forcing this, you didn't make the metric, you kids didn't score enough runs. Come on, man, you shouldn't be coaching.
Man, I wish there wasn't licensing issues, because I would play that song in the background right now if I could. That was I didn't know where you were going, George, when you said my favorite poets, but you had me once you said 38 Special. I knew exactly where you were going, man. That's great. So how does this operational excellence connect directly to dignity and respect for those shop floor employees?
Yeah. The willingness to recognize that value is created in the moment that somebody touches that raw material. Now, that could be, code, it could be data, and the work I do to transform that raw data into some kind of finished good, a clean marketing list, or to take that, stock and be able to mill it and create it into the part that meets your specification. I use the example in the book of that, and I don't think it's a fairy tale that, younger generations know, but I know the story of Rumpelstiltskin, right? That you take straw, and with this sort of magical loom, you take the straw and you change it into gold. And I actually think that is a description of what manufacturing is, that you take raw material, things that don't have as much value, and with this magic machine called a CNC, I turn it into something that people will pay more money for, right?
Yeah.
So if you start thinking of your operators, you start thinking of your employees as truly having magic, because they have the ability to make this equipment create something people will give you money for. That kind of transforms things a lot. And I think it comes down to respect. It comes down to empathy. It comes down to an understanding that if you're working 12 and 16-hour days, that is a level of dedication and character that a lot of, more senior leaders probably wouldn't be able to maintain for more than a few weeks.
Yes.
It is a level of intensity that if you don't have respect for it, you've never done it.
Yeah. Absolutely, without a doubt. So, why do you think so many manufacturing organizations burn out their best people? And what can leaders do to stop that vicious cycle of burning them out and them leaving, or, making a mistake, or whatever that looks like? How can we stop that?
Waste is the enemy here. We talked about, not wanting to have people just hustle and just work faster. I think it happens in the culture, it happens in organizations, and people don't get burnt out from winning. People don't get burnt out from being successful and having, clean shifts that don't have a lot of hassle, a lot of frustration. They don't get burnt out with any of those things. They get burnt out because you're wasting my time. They get
Mhm.
burnt out because you're giving me unrealistic objectives and you're screaming at me like an 8-year-old kid because we haven't scored enough runs. And I'm telling you, coach, you haven't shown me how to swing the bat, but you keep telling me how many times I haven't scored, right?
Right.
That that's what burns me out. It's like, well, why would I want to show up to practice when the coach just yells at me, Dad?
Yep.
Right? Like, why
Absolutely.
would I want to do that? So that's all waste. And it frustrates me to no end when I see leaders who talk a big game around lean manufacturing or Six Sigma or world-class manufacturing or whatever buzzword you want to insert here. And they know the words to this song, but by no means can they get up there and, play that music. At best, they're doing bad karaoke. And and that, that is killing the audience, right?
Yes.
Your audience are these magical creatures that are creating value for you. Give them what they need, give them what
Yeah,
they want.
absolutely. And this is why I love this show, right? Is as you're talking, not only am I reflecting in my world of work experience, the shops that I've gone into, but as a parent and previous coach and watching my kids go through youth sports, all of these things that you're saying are relevant to so many different aspects of life, right? It's
And
not just the world of work, it's not just parenting. And when I was doing a lot of leadership development training workshops, people would ask me all the time, well, it sounds like you're talking about parenting. And there's that the Venn diagram between parenting and leadership of people, there is a massive overlap there. And if anybody takes anything away from today's conversation, I think that what George is talking about is such a massive benefit for personal life and for professional life. So again, thank you. So what role, George, does excellence play in rebuilding trust between workers on the floor and leadership teams? Because, and this by no means is reflective of the entire industry, but we do know those shops. I mean, I'm sure you can in your head picture a couple right off the bat. I've got a couple that I'm picturing right now where there's just not that trust. So what role does this excellence, operational excellence, play in rebuilding that trust?
Well, I think there is a school of thought around the kind of the traditional operational excellence models that are identifying your waste, identifying your variation, fixing your defects. And I do believe there are elements of that that are valuable and necessary in every organization. But I do think there is a limitation to what that creates. And that's where, what we've been talking about today, what super performance is all about is what I think is the gap and what's helped us be successful in our practice. And it's focusing on the wins, not just the losses. If I go back to that little league analogy again, if I've got one kid who can swing that bat like Babe Ruth, man, it's a gift. And it's not a gift because I got one kid I know I can put in the lineup, because that's the coach who's kind of really short-sighted. What it is something that every other kid gets to see. And when I can point out about how high that kid's elbow is, how wide his stance is, and you all see that, that's something now the other kids can emulate. And that opportunity to kind of create that infection, that is what changes cultures and kind of transforms shops. And I think finding successes, finding things people do well, telling them that they're doing it well, asking them how they're doing it so others can learn. I've found that the crustiest, nastiest, most frustrated employee that people are like, you are never, ever going to get that guy to talk to you. I'm like, okay, that's my guy now.
Yeah.
Right? That's the one, because if I can get him to talk to me, if I get him to offer me some ideas and advice, then I've kind of proven you're wrong about the potential of these people. If I take the kid who's behaving and performing the best because he's asking for teacher's attention, that's not really a trick.
Yeah.
He was going
Good
to be
point.
there no matter what, right? She was going to be there no matter what. So turning that frown upside down, and I find it by looking for the positives, having the conversations about what is the things that you are doing that really are differentiating, are really valuable. And I think, even the definition, we talk about the good shops, bad shops, the same thing happens with crews, the work cells, the organizations. Say that's a good crew. Okay. By what metric? Because they work nights, they have no preventative maintenance assistants, they have no, shop maintenance, they've got, no material handlers. So yeah, their metrics and productivity are the worst. But if you gave them a material handler and gave them shift maintenance to deal with their issues, they'd blow your day shift away.
Yep. Absolutely.
So this whole idea that I take a metric and then I start judging an entire group, that's also just so short-sighted on leaders' parts.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. One more question about your organization, capacity to care. Part of this capacity to care is you challenge people to donate their talent, like I talked about earlier. What is one misconception that people have about giving back and donating their talent, not just their time?
I actually had this conversation recently with an accountant, and we were kind of talking exactly about this, organization, this effort. And they said, I really wanted to do something. And I said, well, I understand that you get paid to be an accountant, but how many of these organizations just don't understand tax planning? How
Mm,
many of these organizations are not kind of structuring the cash flow in their business so that they can kind of maintain a level of buffer and consistency, or even understand what cash flow is? Your ability, your experience, your knowledge could prevent that nonprofit from going out of business because they didn't understand what cash flow was.
mm,
You know, they
yeah.
they overspent the checkbook. But your ability to help them understand it or create a spreadsheet for them where they can track it could make the difference, all the difference in the world. And it's great to go down and pack boxes for Thanksgiving. It makes you feel better. And it is something that more people should do. But you have skills that that organization needs. And I think that's not just true of an accountant, it's also true of a machinist. Because although the nonprofit's not going to have a CNC machine, machinists understand precision. They understand work orders. They understand setup documents. And what is the setup document for that Thanksgiving box? How visual should it be? How well should it be laid out? How should we be organizing the parts that we're going to put together? There's stuff that just by being a machinist, you just naturally accept as like, well, everybody would do it this way.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's not what's going to happen.
And so are you familiar with Fix It Clinic?
No, I'm not.
So, Fix It Clinic started in San Fran. It's an organization that provides communities with the ability to broken appliances, broken things that they have. And so, what I do with some of the shops that I've worked with, or at least been in, and they're looking for team building activities. They're looking at ways to bring their community together. Is I recommend that they hold a Fix It Clinic. What better shop, and this goes right into your philosophy there, right? What better place to have, especially in rural areas, even urban areas, right? But the ability to bring in a broken toaster or a broken vacuum, right? Who These people do this for a living. They can machine the part. They have the wiring. They have the tools to do it, right? To open that overhead bay door on a Sunday or a Saturday and say, "Hey, I'm going to host this for 4 hours. Bring in all your broken junk, and we'll fix your shit for free, or teach you how, even better." And then they pay that forward, right? Uh,
I love I love
and so I just wanted to introduce you to that. I want to know, how can somebody like me get involved with your organization, Capacity to Care? Because I've always looked at volunteering for nonprofit work as packing Thanksgiving boxes. I once a month go out and work with an organization here in Phoenix called Bay's Blessings. We hand out in an underserved area of Phoenix, food and clothing and things of that nature. But that's not taking advantage of my skill sets, my what I do well. And I think that that's a miss. Just hearing you, it kind of clicked in my head. So how can somebody like me, who has always looked at nonprofit as, I've either got time or money that I can donate to this nonprofit, how do I get involved with you to look at donating my talents?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. And, my journey here from working with a handful of really large clients for the vast majority of my career and kind of advocating and encouraging them and the people I train, that I develop these relationships with to do these things, now has gone wider, obviously, with having the chance to talk to yourself and your audience. So we're going to be launching a website here in 2026 for people to, really both get information so they can kind of go do it on their own, but also to have us help facilitate some of those conversations. Sometimes there are legal and insurance kind of questions, especially with some professional services and activities, but all of those things are potentially addressable. But they're also barriers that sometimes need to kind of be addressed. So we've thought about and kind of worked with a lot of them, not all of them, but we have a lot of effort, a lot of time. So we're going to be putting that out as a website here in 2026. But in the meantime, my company, myblendedlearning.com, and my personal website, georgepesansky.com. If you get in touch with us, we certainly will connect and kind of try to offer any assistance, any advice that we have.
Awesome. Look, you and I will continue this conversation at a later date because I love that idea, right? Because it's something more tangible. It goes beyond that feel good feeling of what I do with Bays and handing out things. It's tangible for them. It's value for them moving forward as an organization, not just the communities that I'm providing these goods or food or whatever to, right? So
Absolutely.
I love this whole concept, man.
Yeah.
I've got two more questions. One is pointed, one is open. If organizations truly, like 100% respected human capacity, what do you feel work would feel like in 10 years?
Well, I think, again, I'm going to go back to perfect is not a unit of time. And I think if you think about that question and you accept that premise that perfect doesn't have to be forever, it can be periodic. I think it happens a lot. It just doesn't happen enough. And it doesn't happen for extended periods of time. So I don't think you have to wait 10 years. I've watched transformations in cultures happen in months, and often related to leadership changes, often related to kind of really making commitments to the relationship that we're going to have as a team, versus a hierarchy. And it usually is starting with, what we did today or what we did this hour, and how that's going to kind of carry on to tomorrow and then next week. And what we're finding is more and more of these good conversations and more of this time. So I don't think it's binary. I think it can be linear, and I think it can grow. And I think some of that seed exists in every organization. Sometimes you just have to dig a little bit to find it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Love it. George, what haven't I asked you that you want to share with the audience? That's my last question.
Yeah, well, I so enjoyed this. I even got my 38 special reference in, so and not one I use very often. So love that. Really, just genuinely appreciate it, Jim. Love the opportunity. I think we had a great conversation. Super performance. 300 pages, about 30 years and 10,000 people that we've coached and trained, where we try to separate out the things that you're not going to likely find in any other kind of book or any other kind of perspective. I wanted to bring something special, bring something different, something fresh. So I hope it helps whoever picks it up, reads it. And I'm also somebody who loves engaging with the audience. So if people reach out, you'll be surprised. I'll actually reach back.
And he will. He is very communicative. And I'll challenge my audience. Anybody who buys George's book, George, where can they buy the book?
Amazon, Barnes & Noble, really everywhere books are sold.
Okay. Anybody who buys George's book takes a selfie with said book, puts your favorite quote from the book into a post, and you post it on LinkedIn. You tag me, you tag George. I will send you a hat and a hoodie from the Manufacturing Connector on the house. It's a good book. Read the book. Let us know what resonated. Interact with us on it, and I'll send you a hat and a hoodie on the Manufacturing Connector. We know where to find you, George, now. George is on LinkedIn. I'll have all of that details in the show notes. George, thank you very much for being here, man. I really appreciate your time. This is a really important conversation because in a time where workers are feeling squeezed and blamed and burned out, you have shown that excellence truly comes from better systems and not squeezing harder, not more pressure. So I really, really appreciate you, your conversations that we've had, and the connection. And I look forward to connecting more, having more conversations in 2026. So thanks again, George.
Thank you so much, Jim. Such a pleasure. And thank you for that kind offer. I think that's amazing. Can't wait to see what your audience does.
Yeah. Well, and I always like to put these at the end because then I know who actually listens to the entire fucking episode, George. And I had to drop an F bomb just to keep my explicit rating up on this. But thank you again for being here and thanks for being a part of my journey.
Thank you.
To the audience, thank you for being part of this journey as well. You're amazing. Every single one of you who reaches out after each of these episodes, to the people who ask how they can support the show, reach out, want to meet and interact with the guests. Thank you so much. Again, if you could take 2 seconds of your time and like and review the show on whatever platform you're on, I would greatly appreciate it. And if you want more of the stuff that I create, check out the Manufacturing Connector YouTube channel. Check out Work But Make It Human, where George has an episode. I'm just waiting for one more recording, and I'm going to batch out 6 episodes in the next season. Check out Industrial Storytellers, the show where I get drunk on stage with friends and we tell stories about manufacturing. I've got a lot of stuff going on. All of it's fun, all of it's high energy. So thank you for being here. Thanks again to George. See you next week. Keep making things, guys.